Hey, everybody. Welcome back. This is the Industrial Strength Podcast. Once again, a podcast focused more on industrial fire departments and industrial hazmat response. If you didn't get it in previous episodes, my name is Randy, hazmat specialist, 17 years on industrial fire department doing hazmat. With me are my co-hosts, Jeff and Steve.
That's right. I'm Steve, a hazmat technician with 3 years in the department and about 10 years on the industrial side of things.
I'm Jeff, 20 years in the fire service with 10 being in the hazmat side of it.
Right.
So what were we talking about?
Right. We've been talking about corporate audits. So in
No,
the first
no,
episode,
It's not an audit, it's an
It's not an
assessment.
Oh, that's right. It's an assessment. In our first episode, this is part two. In part one, we had talked about how a call from India was not ours, how it generated an internal corporate audit for us. And being emergency responders, we got pulled into the corporate audit to answer about how we would do things, how we handle calls. And so in the first part, we kind of went over what the call was, some of the different types of audits you can have, and we got into one of the questions. And in this part two, we're going to kind of go through the rest of the questions we face in the audit and let you know how we answered it, kind of give you a light on how some of these audits may go.
And I think it's just also important to recap real quick what exactly led to that explosion over there at that site. And what had happened was they had a solvent similar to actually exactly the same as one of the ones that we use quite frequently on site, MTBE. And that leaked, moving vapor clouds from the floor that it leaked on down to the first floor and made its way into an electrical room that wasn't classified in a small spark. Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
It
resulted in a high
explosion.
energy release.
That's right. And that led to multiple deaths. I believe it was 17 in total, as well as multiple injuries on top of that.
Right.
So,
it's pretty sobering.
Yep. Our corporate looked at that and said, that's something that could easily happen throughout our company. Let's go do a assessment of how our facilities run.
Right.
So, let's get back down to the questions again.
Yeah.
So, Randy, maybe you want to answer this. How are our emergency managed,
Yeah.
Is there a difference on minor ones, major ones?
Right. Yeah. So that was a great question. And so for our department, we classify emergencies as minor emergencies or major emergencies, depending on the scope of the call. Right. So, and then the auditor got into the weeds a bit and asked, well, what defines major and minor emergencies, which we described as, the scope of what it is. So does it require evacuations? Does it require how much downtime to the facility, building, area, even the site may it incur, right? And then in addition to that, questions came about, were there mutual aid agreements in place for emergencies, which if you listen to previous episodes, when we talked about the high energy release, we talked about bringing in mutual aid. We brought in two separate departments. And then it brought in another really good question. How are your responders notified of an incident? Which that's the first time they brought that in, which that is a interesting thing too. So, I mean, that should be thought-provoking. How are your emergency responders dispatched to a call, right? Is it some sort of over the loudspeaker? Is it a pager system? How is that done?
So I think that one's a little unique for us on our site because we have the overhead system with strobes and alarms audibly. Also announcements that go to the entire site, which encompasses both colleagues and first responders. Yeah. But how are our actual first responders notified in these incidents, since we're talking on that side of things?
Yeah, it's funny because go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, we can go three different ways on that. We can go old school.
Yeah,
the old pager system.
Yeah,
an actual pager.
Yeah, like a 1980 drug dealer pager. We used to have beepers.
Yeah.
So, what's the next one that we got on our site?
Well, then there's always a text message. That's a little newer.
Yep, agreed.
Then finally, that system is pretty old now.
Right, yeah. And we finally got with the times, and we got with an outside vendor, and we actually have dispatch on the phones.
Now, those were 3 ways, but if I'm not mistaken, I think we actually have a 4th way too.
Actually, you are correct.
Oh.
We do have radios.
You're right. Yes.
Yep, as archaic as that might sound.
But it works, right? Because most of our responders do carry trunk radios. And so we do have our own fire department channel. And so it's a good way of broadcasting that out. So you're right. And so some of the other auditor questions about emergency, how those emergencies are managed, is they wanted to know, do we use any sort of systems, like rigorous systems in place, like incident command, which we do. How does the department enable resources for responses, which is another good call, a good question for our calls. So how do we determine what resources are required and how do we get them mobilized? And then finally, is there a business continuity plan for long calls or calls with protracted cleanups, which, once again, if you listen to our high energy release podcast, that was a prolonged, protracted cleanup. And so was there business continuity plans in place for something like that? So those are all really good questions, right? So, and yes, I mean, we do have differentiations for major and minor emergencies, and it depends on the duration and scope. Is there mutual aid agreement in place for our department? Yeah, we have mutual aid agreements in place for second and third alarm calls. How are responders notified? We talked about that. Does the department use systems like incident command? Very much so. We use it on hazmat and fire. We don't so much on medical calls, but that's because our medical folks aren't, once again, incorporated into our fire side of things, so they don't have incident command training. And then finally, how do we enable resources for response? Typically, first responding units on scene will size up what we have and determine what's needed and call in for things that haven't shown up yet. And then do we have business continuity plans? Yeah, we're a corporation. So we have plans for everything.
Absolutely. And those cleanups, typically we end up contracting out to one of our environmental contractors.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Jeff and Randy, what level of training is your team certified to?
Right. So points to this, I think if anyone listened to our podcast number 4 about the history of our department, they should be able to answer this for us. But Jeff, how do we do it?
Well, we still go under the OSHA 1910, I believe it's 120, and 1910.
156?
156. Thank you. I was going to say 154, but yeah, it's 156.
Yeah.
So we still are under guidelines. And we do follow NFPA guidelines as well, but we're not bound by those.
Right, yeah. Being an industrial department, we are only bound by OSHA. We comply to NFPA, but it's not as binding to us as it is municipal departments.
Now, do you guys have special certifications or anything?
Well, so firefighting, for our fire brigade, they still have to be firefighter 1 and 2. You do go through an organized training.
Yes.
You do get your certificate from there. As far as medical goes, you still need to be at least a medical first responder.
Right.
We do everything else. And we do, we still get all the research through the company, which is awesome.
Right, yeah.
Hazmat.
Don't forget about our hazmat guys, yeah.
Hazmat, there's the 40 hours is at a minimum.
Right.
Anything you want more is an 80-hour class. So,
right.
If you're going to really go inside, you're going to be at the technician level.
Right. And we tend to like to do that more recently, like last 3-4 years. We've been sending all our folks to an 80-hour class, and we also get them pro board certification too.
Now, are those initial certifications the only thing you guys have to do for training? Or do you have to maintain some sort of level of training?
Oh, gosh, we do quarterly trainings. And it's 8 hours a day, and it's in depth. We usually do probably 2 to 3 hours in the classroom, and then we're out doing hands-on. We're actually getting suited up. We're using our stuff.
Yeah.
I think our props are getting better and better, if I must say myself.
Right, yeah. Right, for sure. So there is continuing education for all our different branches, medical, fire, hazmat, and confined space. And so we conduct that continuous training, our quarterly training, so we get all the continuing education we need to recertify yearly.
Now, how do you accomplish that yearly training? Do you guys do it all internally, or do you bring in external training companies to do that, or is it kind of a combination?
And
so the answer is yes, actually.
Yeah, it's a great question. Because we do a blend of things, right? So we do internal hands-on training. We do bring in outside vendors. We do computer-based training. We do a lot of things, right? So we try and keep
computer-based
training
is the best. You can learn a lot.
Sometimes you can, but it depends on who produced it, and you're always up to the quality of the production, right? So I always thought hands-on training is a little better, whether you're producing it yourself or you're bringing outside vendors to do it.
I've seen plenty of people do that computer-based training where their feet up on their desk and a phone in their hand or sleeping. So
right. But then again, that's more to the quality of the student, not the quality of the production, right? So
you haven't been on that training site recently, clearly. That's an interactive training.
You
some
can
of
still
the
do
newer
it.
Ones are.
Click.
Yep. All
I don't do that.
About 20 clicks to do the same thing that you used to do in 2.
So really, a lot of the training that we have on the fire side, I find that very interesting. It's very relevant. And then we'll have the training on that material that next quarter. So I personally find it very relevant.
Yep. So here's an interesting question that the auditor hit us with. So after he asked us that about training, he then asked, is every employee on site trained in your emergency action plans? And are contractors trained? Meaning what he meant, the understanding was, do they all know what the fire department personnel are going to do and how they're going to do it? So it's almost like asking them, do they know what to expect and how they should behave?
Now, I thought the more interesting follow-up point to that is when we actually described that process, he then asked us, how do you know that they're trained?
Right. And, that's a great question for outside agencies too, right? To think about. So do you set expectations for your colleagues that you work with so they know what you're supposed to be doing, what's expected of them? Or is it just every single time you got to manage them because they don't know what they should be doing, how they should be doing it? So that's a great question. And that's a whole different type of training too.
Well, the correct answer would be yes, everyone's trained.
Yes.
I think the logical answer is it's the effort that you put into that training.
Right.
Absolutely. So for our particular team, the answer is everyone on site is trained on a general overview of emergency plan and response. But then we also get specific training based on our internal jobs outside of departments, as well as if you're on the team, you get that emergency response team training that's specific to your unit. And then the contractors are kind of trained under a whole different group that the site does a training for them before they're even allowed on site.
Right.
And
I think most of their emergency response stuff is just phone in a problem and then evacuate.
That's
pretty much
pretty
close. What it is.
Yeah, they don't really have much responsibility where, like you said, Steve, a lot of our people from our chemical production side of things, they may have other responsibilities that they need to accomplish.
Yep.
So how does that old saying go? When in doubt, run in circles, scream and shout.
That's how you know where to find the call.
Yeah, phone a friend.
So then the other thing that we do that not everyone does is we actually have what we talked about, computer-based training system that even if you're not doing necessarily those reading signs, it's all assigned to everybody on site from day one. And then same goes for anything additional needed for our emergency response team. We actually have an external training site that we can get refreshers on for things like medical, keep our certifications up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So one of the other questions that they had asked, are your employees' response plans built around specific chemicals? With us being a chemical plant, or are they more of a generic plan that's been tailored to every call?
Now, see, that was a great question because as soon as that came out of the auditor's mouth, it was like a collective eye roll and a groan. Like, there's no way you can have like a response plan for every chemical in every building. That ream of paper needed would be endless.
How many chemicals do we have, Randy?
Like thousands. We have thousands of chemicals, and so those chemicals you'd have to write a plan for each chemical for every building, and it's going to be a different response for every chemical for every building. It was a good question, but I don't think he was as familiar with our site as he could have been, because it's just one of those things where it has to be a generic call that gets tailored every time for the chemical in the area.
But what's your response plan if acetone was to spill?
As a what? No.
How do you know exactly what PPE to wear and what meters and monitors to use based on that solvent?
Right. And, that was a great question he hit us with, right? But that comes back to our training on hazmat, right? So we have systems in place for assessing hazards, determining what the best meter is, determining what the best chemical protective clothing is, right? And it goes back to generalized training. This not just specifically for industrial, but even municipal departments, right? So you're talking ERG, you're talking like NIOSH. We use a system at work that you can't get anymore, unfortunately, not right now. But it's a way of doing chemical hazard assessment on a series of flashcards, and we use that to categorize a chemical hazard based on chemical family, and it tells you what the best fit for meters and clothes and distances are.
It's actually a neat system, but
it is. But where's your procedure that tells you exactly what you need to do on each call?
See, that's where you got this guy here. But and that was our answer, right? So that's where you need to have those technicians who can also be tech advisors, who can then go through the information, parse out what's important and what's not, and come up with a viable plan. But then that's where you then get that plan, a tentative plan, because it's not set in stone until everyone agrees on it, that it's a good plan, seems workable, there are no concerns, comments, or criticisms, and there's no thoughts on how to do it safer. And then once the team has agreed on it, that's how we roll.
But isn't every spill the exact same per that single chemical? Doesn't matter where it's at.
Right, and that's kind of where the audit was coming from. But I don't, maybe it might be a lack of him having worked in a chemical plant, him just purely being an auditor, a corporate auditor. No two spills are the same. Just like no two medical calls are the same. Could be the same house, same person, same building, same person, but no two calls are the same. It'll be a different time of day, different temperature, slightly different symptoms, different outcomes. No two things are the same.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, one of the other questions that came about from this audit, it was, how are emergency communications transmitted to on-site employees and to the emergency responders?
Right.
Which I think we touched a little bit about earlier.
Yeah. That we use like the life safety alarms, which is strobes and audible alarms for employees. And for our emergency responders, right, we have the text-based system, radio, and then phone dispatches.
But I think one key point to touch on with that life safety, with the strobes and the horns, is how do you know what type of emergency you have going on based on that?
Yeah, this might be something that's more specific to our site, but we have a series of bells that go off. And the bells relate back to specific things, whether it's an evacuation or a tornado drill, tornado watch or drill or whatever it might be. But the bells
Randy,
go back
how
to certain
annoying are
things.
those bells?
Mans.
Oh, golly.
They test them every Friday. You get real numb to them, I'm just saying. So the lights are at least entertaining.
Yeah, that actually leads into the other question, if there is an emergency, how often do these get tested? How often do emergency evacuations, tornado drills? So you kind of touched on that. Every Friday, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It's I believe it's the first Friday of every month, if I'm not mistaken. They test a different version of this. So in my experience, the tornado drill, there's no way you're sleeping through, because that thing's like 21 bells in a row, repeated 3 times.
Yeah. But
I don't know. I think I did a pretty good job one time.
But then again, I'm actually glad they do it, because every time they do it, you find speakers that have become inoperable over the course of the last month, or
or
for whatever reason,
that don't work.
Right. And so once again, it's a way of catching an engineered safety flaw and fixing it before it becomes a real issue. So, which I'm grateful for. As annoying as the bells are, I'm glad that we do it, because we always find things that aren't correct, and it gives us another chance to correct it before something serious happens.
And actually, with a tornado, we do have a siren on top of one of our buildings.
That's right. Old Cold War
loud.
one. Oh, I forgot about the air raid siren. That's right.
Yes.
You have that. I think it's the first Saturday of every month.
Yeah.
Yeah, right around 1:00, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. That's when we roll it, man. It's good
Yep.
times.
So with those communications, another question that was kind of brought up to us was, who dispatches those to you guys? Are those a dedicated part of your department?
Yeah, and that's a great question that applies, because in municipal departments they have a dispatch center, but in industrial, how does that happen? And one of the other questions that came to my mind was, are they ever conjoined as to just one dispatch center that handles more than one thing? Like you said, is it dedicated? And for our site, unfortunately, it's not. It used to be, right? We used to have dedicated dispatchers, but if you listen to our history podcast 2 episodes ago, we talked about corporate restructuring, when that happened and we lost our full-timers.
Episode 4, you need to go listen.
That's right. When we lost our full-timers, they also reorganized the dispatchers, and they all had to pick up other jobs and take dispatch on top of that. So while they do dispatch, and that's an active part of what they do, they're not 100% focused on it. And then to make things more complicated, there's separate security dispatch and a separate fire department dispatch.
Gosh, yeah.
So for us, it's complicated, but hopefully this is thought-provoking for other industrial departments, and hopefully it's not as complicated for them.
Well, and then one of the other things was, we were kind of asked, how does that process evolve for the emergency? So from start to finish, how does that get dispatched out?
Yeah. So, right. So like from when someone notices something, right? So how does that work? And, for us, we actually have nice dedicated numbers on site, right? So just like on the outside, you call 911, we have dedicated numbers for emergencies internally, and you call it and it goes right to our fire department dispatch. So that way that they can be notified and they put out a call in pretty quick order to the right teams, so we get dispatched. Because once again, we're held to a less than 4-minute response time for most calls.
Yeah, and I'd say we're on site probably usually within a 2-minute time frame during our normal working hours.
Agreed. Which that brings up another good question. So what if your site's not 24 hours a day, right? What if it's not a 24/7 operation? How do, the auditor asks, how would we handle things that are, off shift? But luckily for us, we are 24/7, not a big deal. So we can handle things around the clock. But I'm sure not every industrial department may not be a 24/7 thing. So how do you handle those off shift calls? That would be an interesting thing.
Well, even to that extent of it, we don't necessarily have a full number of people on site with our team for that full 24 hours. I mean, you get to the off shift about midnight, 1:00, you might have 2 guys on site.
Right, yeah. But at least they can make an initial scene size up while we get guys responding from home.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. I've responded from home several times, so.
Yep, so have
absolutely.
Any hazmat, any fire, I'm on.
Yep. I believe I just did it yesterday. I literally had just left, made it halfway home, and turned right back around and came back in.
Yep. So that's how that works.
So, hey, Steve, what equipment do we use in our facility? And who determines those set points?
Oh, you're talking like fixed meters and stuff.
Yeah.
So we actually have a group dedicated to determining the best practices for our site, and they work in conjunction with both city and county governance as well as state on this with the environmental aspect. But that group is a process safety management and risk management team. And they kind of govern our whole site for what meters, monitors, all that kind of stuff are used both within the production facility and on our team to kind of help us with that. And we go through what we call a change management process that we kind of put in our request for what new project or building we want to put up. And that goes through that change management request. It gets reviewed by multiple peoples at multiple levels. And then ultimately our safety management group will determine whether we need, say, one oxygen monitor in the area or maybe 2 oxygen monitors and a CO2 monitor. So it's all kind of based on what processes are going to get ran in that area. But we do have those dedicated team members that make those decisions for us.
So it sounds like engineering controls.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Not that we've touched on that a few times over our last few episodes.
Yeah.
And one of the other interesting questions that the auditor asked, it came back to the department capabilities, right? So one of the things that for me was a little thought-provoking is he had asked, what emergency vehicles does your department have and use, right? So they are looking for our capabilities as a department. So, like, what vehicles do we have? I think this kind of mainly came back to, like, our fire engine. Like, what does it have? Does it have phone capabilities? This was more like a truly firefighting question where they wanted to know, what can we handle? What's our maximum capacity? When do we need to start bringing on municipal departments to help us? And so that was interesting because they wanted to go over what our vehicle complement was, what the water and foam ratios were, and they even want to know things like, do we have any foam flow to fixed facility like tanks and tank farms and stuff like that? So to me, I thought that was interesting. It might be thought-provoking for other departments to consider that too. What are your department capabilities based by vehicle, and at what point do you exhaust that and need to call in mutual aid?
Sure. Absolutely. What about spills, leaks? Chemical specific. I think we kind of already touched on those.
Yeah.
Another one of the questions was, does your department conduct training, especially with external agencies? I'm pretty sure we've touched on that today, previous episodes too. So,
right. Yeah, we
but
do
I think
for sure.
Great thought-provoking questions to think about with your department.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that one of the other questions that kind of stuck with me, just because we are so unique and not necessarily the same as all municipal departments across the board with all of our different teams, is there a minimum or a maximum certification level that you're required to have as an emergency responder?
Right. I think for our department, we do minimums, but I don't think we ever cap for max, right? So while for medical, our minimum is MFR. I know we have people who are EMTs, paramedics. We have a couple people with nursing licenses because that's what they want. They like it for whatever else they're doing outside of work. So we don't ever cap.
And we welcome that, but
Yeah.
you still have to work within the equipment that we have.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
So,
you're held to the minimum, but you're not held to a maximum. But you're right. You can't, since we're an MFR team, you can't pull out a paramedic med bag and do stuff. That's not how we roll. You can have all that knowledge, you just can't have all those fancy tools.
Well, and I thought the one uniqueness that we have that's kind of interesting is we do maintain those same certification levels as our local municipal departments do, with the exception of one team. That's our hazmat team.
Yeah.
And we actually go above and beyond in our minimum requirement for that nowadays.
Yeah, because you're right. The rest of municipal teams around us, they are all at ops level. Where for our team, we prefer to be techs, right? Because once again, being in a chemical production facility, we want to minimize and mitigate the hazard as soon as possible. So we go hands-on, man. So our minimum is tech, and so for that reason, we're put on par with our county hazmat team. So, but once again, one of the things that I think we failed to mention maybe in our history episode is our company may have allegedly started the county hazmat team for them. So,
yeah, actually, allegedly, you never know.
Right. But you know what? I think this might be a good time to break this episode. What do you guys think?
Absolutely.
I think so.
So let's wrap this up.
I do like to point out that this was just from a industrial industrial side of an audit, but it's a good thought-provoking question for municipal departments, because even if you don't get any of these regulatory agencies coming in, it gets a lot of questions that could help improve your training, the way you run things on a daily basis, efficiency.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll tell you what, if anyone else has ever been sitting in on a corporate audit or had to answer questions based on a corporate audit, let us know, right? Shoot us an email. So Jeff, how would they find us?
Hey, you can contact us at hazmatharder.com. Steve, what do we have in store for next episode?
So I think next time we're going to be talking about evolution of calls, both within our hazmat team and a single call with a spill incident that evolves into a multidiscipline call at the same time into a medical call.
I love it.
And how you split your resources to make both things happen.
Oh, that's a good call. Okay. Perfect. So stay tuned, everybody. Until then, Hazmat Harder.
Thanks
for tuning in again.